Somewhere in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there is a woman in her 70s who has never bought a tube of hand cream in her life. Her hands have kneaded bread dough every morning for 50 years. She has hauled water, split kindling, and worked garden soil in every season from February frost to August heat. And her skin, by every reasonable expectation, should look like weathered saddle leather. It does not. Her skin is smooth, supple, and remarkably even in tone. Not because of genetics, not because of a gentle lifestyle, because every 2 weeks she mixes a small clay pot of something her grandmother taught her, something her grandmother's grandmother used before that, and something that costs her almost nothing to make from ingredients that have been sitting in every farmhouse pantry for generations. The recipe is not a secret inside the Amish community. They do not treat it like a proprietary formula. They share it the way they share everything, freely, across back fences and quilting circles and after-church meals. The reason most of the outside world has never heard of it has nothing to do with Amish secrecy. It has to do with the fact that no one can make money selling you something you can make yourself for less than $2. That gap between what works and what gets marketed to you is what this video is about. Cracked skin is one of the most common and genuinely painful conditions a person can live with. The medical term is xerosis when it is dry, and raggedez when the cracks become deep enough to bleed. Dermatologists see it constantly. They prescribe emollients, recommend urea-based creams, suggest barrier repair moisturizers that range from $15 to $80 a tube. And those products work, to varying degrees, for varying lengths of time. But the moment you stop using them, the condition returns. That is the nature of a solution built on a product rather than on a principle. The Amish paste operates on a different principle entirely. It is not a moisturizer in the modern cosmetic sense. It does not simply sit on top of the skin and create a temporary barrier. It feeds the skin at the cellular level with substances the skin already recognizes and knows how to use, while simultaneously drawing out the inflammatory response that makes cracked skin stubborn and slow to heal. The result is not a temporary fix. Over consistent use, the skin actually restructures. The cracks close and stay closed. The underlying texture changes. The skin behaves as if it has been reminded of what it is supposed to do. To understand why this paste works the way it does, you need to spend a moment understanding what cracked skin actually is and why it persists so stubbornly in so many people. Your skin is not a passive wrapper. It is your largest organ, and it is actively managed by a complex ecosystem of proteins, lipids, cells, and microorganisms working in continuous coordination. The outermost layer, the stratum corneum, is made up of flattened dead cells embedded in a matrix of lipids, primarily ceramides, cholesterol, and fatty acids. These lipids are not decorative. They are the mortar between the bricks of your skin cells. They determine how much water your skin retains and how effectively your skin defends against environmental irritants. When the lipid matrix is depleted, which happens through excessive washing, cold, dry air, certain soaps, nutritional gaps, age, and prolonged mechanical stress on the hands and feet, the stratum corneum loses its integrity. It becomes brittle. It develops fissures. Bacteria and environmental compounds get into those fissures and trigger a low-grade inflammatory response, and that inflammation actually interferes with the skin's ability to repair itself. The cracks that never fully heal are stuck in a loop between structural damage and inflammatory interference, and topical moisturizers alone cannot fully break that loop because they address the symptom rather than the mechanism. The Amish paste addresses the mechanism. The core of the paste is rendered tallow, specifically beef tallow, that has been clarified slowly over low heat until it is pure, pale, and completely clear of any water content. Tallow has an almost identical fatty acid profile to human sebum, the oil your skin naturally produces. The ratio of saturated to unsaturated fats in beef tallow, roughly 50% saturated, 45% monounsaturated, and 5% polyunsaturated, mirrors the lipid composition of healthy human skin so closely that the skin absorbs it without the inflammatory response it has to other foreign substances. It is not being processed as something alien. It is being incorporated as a building block the skin already knows how to use. This is the fundamental insight that modern skincare has largely moved away from in its pursuit of patentable, novel ingredients. The skin does not need novel. It needs familiar. It needs the lipids it was designed to use, delivered in a form it can absorb and integrate. Tallow was the standard skin treatment in virtually every pre-industrial culture that had access to cattle. Roman legionaries, medieval healers, and pioneer women all used it. It fell out of fashion not because something better replaced it, but because petroleum-derived emollients became available to manufacturers who needed something that could be produced at scale for almost nothing. The second major ingredient in the Amish paste is raw, local honey, and its role in the formula is distinct from the tallow in a way that matters enormously to the outcome. Honey is hygroscopic, which means it draws moisture from the environment into itself. When applied to skin, it acts as a humectant, pulling atmospheric moisture into the skin's surface layers. But that is the least interesting thing honey does in this context. Raw honey, and specifically honey that has not been heated, filtered, or processed, contains hydrogen peroxide in small but clinically significant concentrations, released slowly through the action of an enzyme called glucose oxidase. This produces a sustained, gentle antimicrobial effect that addresses the bacterial component of the inflammation cycle that keeps cracked skin from healing. Raw honey also contains a range of enzymes, amino acids, and polyphenols that have measurable anti-inflammatory properties. Studies on honey-based wound dressings, which are used in clinical settings in several countries for exactly the conditions that produce cracked and fissured skin, have documented faster healing times, reduced infection rates, and better cosmetic outcomes than standard petroleum-based treatments. This is not fringe science. It is published and replicated. The reason it is not translated into mass-market skincare products is straightforward. Raw honey cannot be standardized, patented, or produced at scale in a way that sustains the margins commercial skincare requires. The third ingredient is beeswax, and its function in the paste is both structural and therapeutic. Beeswax provides the paste with its consistency. Without it, the tallow and honey would separate, and the preparation would have no staying power on the skin. But beeswax also contributes several of its own active compounds, including vitamin A precursors and long-chain hydrocarbons that further support the skin's lipid barrier. It creates what cosmetic chemists call an occlusive layer, a breathable seal over the treated skin that slows transepidermal water loss without suffocating the skin or interfering with its natural respiratory function. This is a critical distinction from petroleum-based occlusives like Vaseline, which create a barrier that does not breathe, and which, over long use, can actually suppress the skin's own lipid production, because the body learns it does not need to work. The fourth component is optional, but transformative: a small amount of calendula-infused oil. Calendula officinalis, the pot marigold, has a documented history as a wound-healing plant going back to at least the 12th century. It contains a class of compounds called triterpenoids that have been shown in multiple studies to promote fibroblast migration, which is the process by which new skin cells move into damaged areas to begin repair. It also contains flavonoids with antioxidant properties that reduce the oxidative stress component of chronic skin inflammation. Amish households with access to a kitchen garden almost universally grow calendula, and the infused oil made by steeping dried calendula flowers in a carrier oil for 4 to 6 weeks is considered a household staple rather than a specialty ingredient. The fifth and final component, used in the smallest quantity of anything in the paste, is a pinch of food-grade bentonite clay. This is perhaps the least intuitive ingredient because clay is not something most people associate with skin hydration. But bentonite clay has a negatively charged molecular structure that binds to positively charged toxins, heavy metals, and bacterial byproducts in the skin's surface layers and draws them out. In the context of cracked skin that has been chronically inflamed, this detoxifying action helps reset the skin's inflammatory baseline, giving the healing ingredients in the rest of the paste a cleaner environment to work in. The clay is not left on the skin long enough to dry, which would be counterproductive. It is incorporated into the paste and removed with the paste, taking its bound impurities with it. Together, these 5 ingredients create something that functions simultaneously as a lipid replenisher, a humectant, an antimicrobial, a cellular scaffold, and a detoxifier. No single commercial product does all of these things. The closest approximation in a dermatologist's toolkit would require 4 or 5 separate products used in a specific sequence. The Amish paste does it in one preparation, made in one bowl, in about 15 minutes. Making it correctly matters. The ingredients need to be combined in the right order and at the right temperature, or the formulation separates and loses its cohesion. You start with your beeswax, about 1 tablespoon of pastilles or grated block beeswax, melted in a small, heat-safe container over the lowest heat possible. A double boiler setup, with your container sitting in an inch of simmering water rather than directly over the flame, gives you the most control. You are looking for the wax to become fully liquid, which happens around 145 degrees Fahrenheit. The moment it is liquid, you remove the heat. Into the melted wax, you stir 2 tablespoons of tallow. The tallow melts immediately because its melt point is lower than beeswax. You stir this combination gently until they are fully incorporated and you have a uniform liquid. At this point, you let the mixture cool until it is warm to the touch, but no longer hot, roughly the temperature of a warm bath. Adding honey to a hot mixture, the heat destroys the enzymes that make raw honey therapeutically useful. This is the most common mistake. When the wax and tallow mixture has cooled to that warm bath temperature, you stir in 1 tablespoon of raw honey, working slowly and thoroughly to create an emulsion. The honey will resist blending with the fat-based ingredients at first. Patience and continuous gentle stirring over about 2 minutes brings it together into a smooth, unified texture. To this base, you add 1 tablespoon of your calendula-infused oil, if you have it, stirring it in fully. If you do not have calendula oil, a tablespoon of rosehip seed oil works as a substitute and contributes its own set of skin-supporting compounds, including trans-retinoic acid, a natural precursor to the retinoids that high-end skincare brands charge a great deal for in synthetic form. Finally, you stir in a 1/4 teaspoon of bentonite clay. The clay will cause the mixture to thicken noticeably. Stir thoroughly to prevent any lumping, and then transfer the paste into a small, clean glass jar. The paste sets to a soft, spreadable consistency as it cools to room temperature. If it sets too hard in a cold environment, a few seconds of gentle warmth between your palms softens it immediately. Application is simple. For cracked heels, which are perhaps the condition this paste addresses most dramatically, you apply a generous layer to clean, slightly damp skin before bed, cover with clean cotton socks, and leave it overnight. The damp skin is important. Humectants like honey work by drawing in available moisture, and if the surrounding environment is very dry, slightly damp skin provides the moisture reservoir the honey needs to do its work. In the morning, you remove the socks, rinse the residue with warm water, and pat dry. Results on cracked heels are typically visible within 3 applications. For cracked hands and fingers, you apply the paste after washing, before any activity that will keep the hands in a warm, covered environment, even just wearing gloves to go outside in winter. For very deep cracks, a small amount of paste packed directly into the fissure and covered with a bandage overnight accelerates the closure dramatically. The mechanism here is not mysterious. The tallow is rebuilding the lipid matrix. The honey is controlling the bacterial microenvironment and pulling in moisture. The beeswax is maintaining the occlusive seal that keeps the active ingredients in contact with the damaged tissue long enough to work. The calendula is stimulating cellular migration into the repair site. The clay has already done its cleansing work before the other ingredients settle in. This is not folk magic. It is basic biochemistry, happening with ingredients that predate every pharmaceutical approach to the same problem by several centuries. Now, here is where this becomes a conversation about something larger than skin cream. The Amish relationship to self-care, which in their context is not a wellness trend but a necessity, is built on a foundational principle that the broader culture has largely lost. that your body and your land are capable of sustaining each other if you know what to ask for and how to prepare what you receive. The same community that makes this paste also grows its own food, builds its own houses, educates its own children, and maintains its own social fabric, largely outside the commercial infrastructure that the rest of American society depends on absolutely. The Amish communities of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana make deliberate, often quite sophisticated decisions about which technologies to adopt and which to decline, based on values around community integrity and self-sufficiency. Whether or not you share their theology, the outcomes of those decisions are worth examining with genuine curiosity. Amish health outcomes in several categories are measurably better than the general American population. Cancer rates are lower. Rates of depression, anxiety, and type 2 diabetes are substantially reduced. Researchers who study this community point to genuine self-reliance as a protective factor. The psychological security that comes from knowing you can meet your own needs without depending on systems outside your control. The paste is one small expression of that self-reliance. But it points towards something bigger. There is a growing movement toward what gets called homesteading, or sustainable self-reliance. The aesthetic version shows up as beautifully composed images of sourdough loaves and dried herb bundles. But the deeper version is about competence, the ability to make things, fix things, and know what is in every product you put on your body, because you made it yourself. To reduce the system standing between you and your basic needs, not as ideology, but as practicality. The Amish paste is worth making, not just because it works better than most commercial alternatives, though it does. It is worth making because making it puts you back in a relationship with your own body and its needs that is different from the relationship you have when you scan a label for ingredients you cannot pronounce and wonder whether the dermatologist recommended endorsement on the packaging reflects clinical reality or a licensing arrangement. There are some modifications worth knowing about, depending on your specific situation and what you have available. If you live somewhere that raw local honey is hard to find, Manuka honey from New Zealand is the most extensively studied alternative and has the highest documented antimicrobial activity of any commercially available honey. It is more expensive, but a tablespoon used in this recipe lasts a long time and costs considerably less per application than any comparable commercial product. If you cannot source beef tallow easily, you can render it yourself from beef kidney fat, called suet, which is available at most butcher shops and many grocery stores for essentially nothing. Clean suet cut into small pieces, cooked in a slow cooker on low for 8 to 10 hours, strained through cheesecloth and refrigerated, produces a pure, odorless tallow that keeps for months and costs about $3 a pound, from which you get far more tallow than you need for several batches of this paste. The alternative to tallow, for those who prefer a plant-based formulation, is a combination of shea butter and coconut oil in a 2-to-1 ratio. Shea butter has a fatty acid profile that approximates sebum reasonably well, and coconut oil contributes lauric acid, which has independently documented antimicrobial properties. The result is not identical to the tallow-based paste in its skin compatibility, but it is substantially more effective than any commercial plant-based alternative at comparable price points. Calendula oil you can make yourself if you have any interest in a small herb garden. Calendula is one of the easiest plants to grow in almost any climate. It tolerates poor soil, reseeds itself prolifically, produces flowers from spring through hard frost, and has essentially no pest or disease issues. Dry the flowers in a single layer in a warm, well-ventilated space for 2 weeks. Then pack them loosely into a clean jar and cover completely with a light olive oil or sweet almond oil. Seal the jar and leave it in a warm, sunny windowsill for 4 to 6 weeks, shaking it every few days. Strain the oil through cheesecloth, pressing the flowers to extract every drop. The resulting oil has a warm, golden color and a faint herbal scent, and it keeps for up to a year if stored away from direct light and heat. Making that oil is an 8-week commitment of about 15 minutes of active effort. What you get in return is an ingredient that, combined with the other components of this paste, produces results that a 12-week clinical trial of a leading barrier repair cream documented in the British Journal of Dermatology could not match at 30 times the cost per application. The total material cost for one batch of paste, which fills a 4-ounce jar and provides roughly 60 to 80 applications, runs between 88 cents and $2, depending on your local ingredient sourcing. A comparable commercial barrier repair product runs $8 to $25 for a smaller quantity, often containing petroleum derivatives and synthetic preservatives that serve shelf life rather than skin health. The value proposition of the commercial alternative collapses the moment you understand what the effective mechanisms actually are and how readily you can source them yourself. The principle extends well beyond skin paste. Once you learn that tallow and honey can outperform a $30 barrier cream, you start asking the same question about other things. What else in my household product cabinet is charging me for complexity and marketing when the effective core is something simple and sourceable? The answer, if you pursue it honestly across categories, from cleaning products to food preservation to personal care, is humbling in its consistency. The Amish figured this out through necessity and continuity. Knowledge that works gets passed down, and knowledge that does not work gets quietly discarded. The paste survived several generations of active use in a community with no incentive to maintain a tradition that did not deliver real results. That is evidence a randomized controlled trial cannot replicate. Which brings up the question of dermatologists, who appear in the title of this video for a reason. The framing that dermatologists do not want you making this paste is, in its most literal sense, probably not accurate. Individual dermatologists are mostly people who genuinely want their patients to have healthy skin, and most of them would have no objection to a patient achieving that with a home-prepared formulation if it worked. The more accurate framing is that dermatological practice exists within a commercial and institutional structure that does not have a mechanism for recommending things that cannot be prescribed, purchased, or tracked. If you walk into a dermatologist's office with cracked heels, you will leave with a prescription or a product recommendation, because that is the tool the system provides. The system does not have a checkbox for "make tallow paste with honey from your local beekeeper." That structural gap is not malevolent. It is the natural result of a medical infrastructure built around scalable, standardizable interventions. But that infrastructure has, over decades, crowded out the lay knowledge that used to fill these gaps. Your grandmother's generation would have known exactly what to put on a cracked heel without seeing a doctor. That knowledge was not replaced by something better. It was displaced by something more profitable. Getting this knowledge back does not require rejecting modern medicine. It requires understanding that modern medicine, particularly in the area of non-acute personal care, has an enormous blind spot where traditional remedies used to live. And that blind spot is worth exploring with real curiosity rather than dismissing as old-fashioned. The Amish woman in Lancaster County with the smooth hands after 50 years of farm work is not a miracle. She is evidence of a system that works. She would not describe it in the biochemical terms used in this video. She would say her grandmother's recipe works, and her grandmother's grandmother used it, and it costs nothing and takes no time, and the proof is in her hands. That is, when you strip everything else away, the entire argument. There is one more thing worth addressing, which is the question of consistency. The reason commercial moisturizers require continuous use to maintain their results is not inherent to the concept of moisturizing. It is inherent to the mechanism of most commercial moisturizers, which create a temporary barrier rather than rebuilding the underlying structure. The tallow-based paste, used consistently over 4 to 6 weeks, actually changes the composition of the stratum corneum. It replaces depleted lipids with biocompatible substitutes that become integrated into the skin's own architecture. After that integration period, maintenance use can be reduced significantly. Many people who adopt this paste find that after the first 4 to 6 weeks of regular nightly application, they need it only 2 or 3 times a week to maintain the results. Eventually, once a week or less. That trajectory is the opposite of what commercial moisturizers produce. It describes a skin that has been restored rather than supplemented. The goal is to use the paste less over time, not more. No commercial skincare company has any financial interest in selling you something that makes itself progressively unnecessary. The Amish do not have that problem because they are not selling anything. Make 1 jar of paste. Use it for 3 weeks. Keep the commercial alternative on the shelf as a control. Compare the outcomes at the end with the clarity you would bring to any other practical question. That is all the argument this recipe needs. The knowledge has been sitting in farmhouse kitchens for several hundred years, passed from hand to hand across generations of people who had no access to dermatologists, no access to pharmacy shelves, and skin that worked perfectly well in conditions that would destroy what most people's hands look like now. It costs almost nothing to make. It requires no special equipment. It takes 15 minutes, and it works for reasons that are fully explicable by contemporary biochemistry, even if it was developed long before biochemistry existed as a discipline. Your skin already knows what to do with these ingredients. It has known for a very long time. Sometimes the most sophisticated thing you can do is give it something it recognizes.